I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name is Jeff Cook. I'm a philosopher in Greeley, Colorado, and with me is TJ Wilson, businessman, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
My man.
Hey.
We are with the fantastic Michael Shahan.
And this is actually the second part of our conversation. So if you missed the first part, go back and listen to that one, get a little context, learn who Michael is. Otherwise, we're just going to jump right in.
Well, this is a good place to transition because we kind of teased it a little bit earlier, but when thinking about speaking about ourselves, all of the types have an underlying feeling. And we're going to work on one of them, vocabulary wise, but 8s, 9s, and 1s are going to have an underlying feeling of anger. 2s, 3s, and 4s are going to have an underlying feeling of shame or sadness, and we're going to discuss that with Michael. And 5s, 6s, and 7s are going to have an underlying feeling of fear. And so those are all very powerful emotions. They can be debilitating emotions. There are things I imagine that in therapy would be hotspots that would trigger, we need to, trigger's not the right word, but that would elicit perhaps we should do some work here sort of reaction, I imagine, as a therapist, yeah?
Yeah. Do you say what's your reaction or you have a reaction?
Well, so when it's the case that you hear in someone that you're working with who understands, like for myself, I understand I'm an angry person. And I understand that that's probably not going to go away in the sense that someday I'll be free of all anger. I probably am going to have to do some work to name that and wrestle through it. So let's start with anger. All three of us are body types. 8s, 9s, and 1s all struggle with an underlying feeling of anger. What sort of things might come to your mind as a therapist when working through anger?
Yeah. So I'd love to start, if I can, talking about each emotion and actually the attachment need that each emotion meets. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, I like that.
Because that's so important. Again, it's like what we're doing with talking about kids. It's what need is this emotion trying to meet? So that anger meets this need of autonomy, right? And control. And it's, I have my space. I'm a person. I need to actualize. Like just growing up, we need to know our sense of self and when we differ from others and how we're just, so anger comes up when our boundaries are being pushed, when we're being hurt. It's a protective thing, right? So our anger is protecting us in a way. It's keeping us safe, emotionally, physically. It's protecting others. It's providing justice. It's anger at unfair things. It's righting wrongs, things like that. So our anger actually has a need. It's good. And then sadness, that emotion comes up when there is a lack of connection, right? When there's loss. And so it draws us toward connection. So we actually need sadness. I don't like defining emotions as good or bad with my clients because that tends to be unhelpful. They have a need.
Smart.
And then you go to fear. And fear keeps us safe. When we are afraid, there is our system has decided that there's something dangerous and you need to look out. If we never felt afraid, we would all be dead already, right? Like a car was coming after us, or if we were right next to a cliff, we'd be like, oh, cool. We just like walk off it because we weren't afraid. And so just even starting with the fact that anger, sadness, and fear are all super important. And they all are sort of these emotions that are meant to get our needs met, our sort of emotional and physical attachment needs met. And so I think it's really important.
I've been a strong advocate of that. And obviously, since there's kind of a spin for us in terms of potentially reframing shame as sadness for 2s, 3s, and 4s, that tends to be the buzzword for folks saying, well, of course, shame is never a healthy thing, is a common view of some. But I do like the idea of sometimes anger has its place, sometimes fear has its place. These are underlying survival at some
yes,
level.
They're survival. They 100% are survival. So maybe not eating food and water. Like they're absolutely a survival need to be connected, to be safe, to be, to self-actualize, to know ourselves and other like that. Those are important.
our
touched.
clearly our sex drive is part of our survival. It's part of our the replication of our genetics, but there's places our sex drive can get ridiculously out of whack, out of proportion, targeting really unhealthy ends. I assume that might be a bad illustration, but it's certainly that's the case with fear, with anger. They can get out of whack. They can target the wrong ends, and
if they get cranked up too high, they start to cause problems, which is what we can even
role to play.
Yes, so they absolutely. And if we ignore the role they have to play, that gets us in so much trouble. Or if we just say this is the most important thing ever, and I'm only going to act from this, that also creates its own problems.
Right.
So it's more of a balancing all three and knowing when they're used and what they're helpful for in this sort of integrated way that I think is the most helpful thing.
Yep.
So yeah, we can talk about anger. Start with the gut triad.
Yeah. With the gut triad, then in anger, a lot of our work right now has been what is the high side of an emotion or one of these topics in the Enneagram, and what's the low side. And so I imagine the high side, low side of anger is very much something we could talk about. So I imagine some people in counseling, you actually would desire them to be more angry at.
Yes.
Some stuff. What is the healthy place for anger in therapy?
And I think they can really, I wish there was an easy answer. I think they can vary wildly depending on cultural context, all sorts of different contexts. But I think anger is a lot of clients, especially very conservative, evangelical, especially women, don't want to not be angry. They think they're bad for being angry because sort of in our culture, that's not how you should be as a woman. And so there can be I want to stop being so angry. And it's wait, what if there's a reason to be angry?
Right.
And so I think that's too big of a question to answer simply, the kind of high and low side of anger. I think when I don't know, I imagine the higher side of whatever emotion it is, it's when you can let yourself feel it fully without any sort of blocks to it, without invalidating it, without beating yourself up, without shaming yourself for feeling it. Maybe without hurting other people, maybe, I don't know, because that could still be, someone might get hurt if you express your feelings of anger toward them. That doesn't mean that's not important. Yeah, so much of the anger issues are the difficult things when people are in my office is when it's being underdone and repressed or overdone. So much, because if anger is such an energetic emotion, it flows through you and it's intense and it's powerful. And when you shove that down, it will come out sideways somewhere. Whether it's numbing it out with addictions or coming out sideways in passive aggressiveness or projecting your anger onto anybody and everybody around you. It can look like all sorts of things when it's repressed. And some people nines usually don't even realize they're angry for so long. I remember it was only maybe 2 or 3 years ago that I realized that I was angry all the time. I remember I was awake that morning for about 15 minutes and I realized something clicked in me. I've been so angry at 3 different things and I've only been awake for 15 minutes, and actually realizing that was really freeing for me. I was I'm angry and that's okay. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. That doesn't mean necessarily, I don't know. For nines, a lot of the work looks like even seeing what they're angry about, because there's the stereotype of nines being just lazy and lethargic and slow moving. I think honestly, the more and more, so much of that comes from how much energy it takes to repress that anger.
Yeah.
It is so much work mentally, physically, to not be angry, to justify everything and to, no, it's fine. Convince yourself that you're not worried about it, that they meant the best. All this stuff just shuts us down. It cuts us off from so much of our own energy and our own life force that we just end up dead inside when we're shutting it down.
And from my own experience, one of the most detrimental thoughts about why I push down anger is because it's not worth being angry about this thing. And it's the reality is that is probably something that I should be angry about.
Yes. People should themselves all over. I shouldn't be angry. I shouldn't be angry. That's not right. That's not if you're never angry, you're going to be taken advantage of. Yep. You're going to be hurt. You're going to be abused and used. And if you don't have anger to protect yourself, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And you won't tell people that hurt you that they've hurt you.
Yes. And they'll keep doing it. Yeah. And they'll keep doing it. And then you'll be even more angry that they're hurting you, but they don't even know that they're hurting you. Yep. So it's not their problem in that moment.
I would love to make a distinction that I'm hearing here. It's one that's common in my field, but there is the feeling of the emotion. And then there's the observing of your experience of the emotion. So I can say now I'm entering that state of being we call anger, I'm entering that space where I'm feeling afraid. I'm entering that space of lust. I'm entering that space of envy. I can name those things as an observer. I also know I know the feeling of the feelings coming up
Physically.
and their power. And so one is an intellectual, a cognitive, observational experience, and one is a physical. I assume it's a physical way of being in the world, and those are two different things. That's what I'm hearing, and I don't know if there's something worth talking about in terms of therapy there. Are you desiring to get them to the spot where let's think about the feeling that you're feeling and then how to filter it?
Oh, that's such another great parallel to the Enneagram. Because I think at their best, when we're feeling our emotions in the most productive way, we can think about them, give a name to the narrative. We can feel them, connect with it in our hearts, and we can feel the sensations that come with it physically, our bodies. So like the head, heart, and gut place. Some people are better at one. Some people are better at the others. Like 5s, so good at, they can name it, research it. I read this book about this feeling, but to actually feel it and be affected by it is very hard for them. Or to point out where they feel it in their body is very, very hard for them. But yeah, I think it takes all 3 of those things. There's actually, sometimes I'll just sort of stay out of this. When you're telling me a traumatic memory, actually, like when I'm working with trauma, it's way less about what actually happened, the story. It's what you think, the meaning you made of it. It's what you were feeling and what you're feeling in your body. Those are more important, actually. And to sort of let those kind of all fire and sync and do the thing together is actually one of the best things that you can do. Because we're sort of in our own center more, and we just favor thinking, or we just favor feeling, or we just favor like body sensations or whatever comes with that. To be able to balance all of them, I think is actually creates more resiliency to not be traumatized by things in the future when we can have access to all 3 centers in that way. Like, here's an example, another vulnerable example. When I brought up my wife earlier with her cancer. When I found out that she had cancer, that drive home after I talked to that guy I had been working with my therapist on not shooting myself or what I should feel or should think. I was like, I'm just going to let what happens. And then I felt terrified in a moment. And then all of a sudden, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? We can do this. And then, I know people who've had this and they've gotten after it. They've gotten through it, like this thinking. And then I would go this feeling like I want to listen to a sad song. And so I'd listen to it and I got really emotional. And then all of a sudden I'd flip to this. What do I need to do? What do I need to do about this? And then it would flip to this. What do I know about this? And I just felt it like going back and forth to all of them. Just like my sort of internal self was just sort of taking what it needed from every center. And I felt so at peace when I got home to talk to my wife, rather than in this, I don't want to feel it. I don't want to let that happen. I'm just going to convince them, like, ignore it. They had sort of letting myself. I think my work with clients is more about taking away the barriers to accessing all 3 of those spaces versus teaching them how to access it, if that makes sense. I think we inherently know how to, but we're in such a routine of our Enneagram number that we are unbalanced and we favor one. But to have access to all of them, our sort of self knows what to do.
Yeah.
One of the things that in my field, a lot of the language that you're using has a lot of overtones with ancient philosophy and thinking of ourselves as body, mind, and soul. And if my body is feeling emotions, the anger, the fear, the sadness, that is a physical feeling. The virtue associated with physical feelings is moderation or a balancing. And so I've loved the language used there in terms of it's not good or bad, but it is the case that it needs to find its right place in your life. And anytime, so that is a should language, but it's a prescriptive language. But wisdom, I don't know how you avoid this in terms of thinking about your emotions. There's a place for wisdom to say, here's the proper place for anger, here's the proper place for sadness, here's the proper place for fear. And to say, here is not a proper place for fear. And that's part of the healthy life, to wisely be able to navigate your emotional life. And then the last one would just be, doing it. The courage, the virtue of courage is being able to execute what wisdom is saying. Here's the best path. But that moderation, wisdom, and justice are a list, which are the cardinal virtues. And when you have them, says Plato, that's the healthy life. So anyway, that's the language that I'm hearing as you navigate the inner. Here are your emotions. How do you deal with your emotions? That was the thing coming to my mind. I don't know if that has anything more to it than, hey, is this fun? This is part of the Republic. But
I think there's so much. I don't know. I like to not be prescriptive on clients. I don't know that we sort of almost self-prescriptive. We sort of self-police our own emotions a lot. We decide internally what we should and shouldn't feel. Whether we absorb that from culture or from what religion we grew up or whatever, sort of dictates what we think is allowed. But there's actually a lot of research that says that, I forget the exact amount, but if we fully let ourselves feel a feeling, it lasts no longer than 30 seconds. But so the example I was given in this training a long time ago is if we see a big wave coming our way of emotion and we turn around and start paddling away, it just lasts longer. It just creeps in slower and slower and affects us longer. Sure. But if we have a sense of safety and connection with another, real, like whether they're present or not present, our nervous system can handle it and let the wave go through, and it's very short how long it actually lasts. So much I think of my clients sort of like, what is in there that you are not feeling? Let's feel it together in a safe holding space, and then you have so much what you need, so much wisdom that comes from that all on its own.
Yeah,
which I love facilitating that for people. That's like my favorite part of it, being a therapist.
That seems real healthy to me. This is both my oneness and my philosopher side, that saying you should is itself self-refuting. Yeah, and so you can't say
only sit steal in absolutes.
Right. So apparently there are some times to say should because you're saying you shouldn't do this. So let's just find the small list of things that are worth investing in. But that might be one of them is finding that you can clearly, and I'm an expert on this, that you can clearly get overly prescriptive about every little detail of your life. And clearly that can be debilitating especially for ones who want to do the right thing, and the right thing is very clear to them.
Yes.
And loosening your hands there to come back to control can be a mark of real health, and that might be your path. So,
because when we go around the circle, I love saying that with you guys. We can even talk about the emotion for each number and how it shows up in therapy and the kind of work that needs to be done around that, or that tends to look like. I think that could be really, really practical and helpful for people. Maybe, I don't know if you guys are okay with that.
Actually, let's start with twos. So I'm not quite convinced yet on the sadness side, but I would love to let this conversation play out. So,
did you want to discuss the whole sadness versus shame thing first?
A quick pitch for sadness versus shame.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that, because I do this in my course for therapists. So shame is an emotion that we don't. So we are born with innate the capacity to feel sadness, fear, anger. Babies feel it from day one in utero, but not shame. Shame comes around. Shame is this socially constructed emotion that tells us what I just did is not accepted by people around me. And oh no, like I'm in danger of being left out and abandoned, which is threatening to us, like physically, our safety. And so shame comes in and says, don't do whatever you just did, because you're going to be abandoned. You're going to be kicked out. So, and shame actually blocks every other emotion from being felt. It's this weird, like, if there's shame about, it doesn't let us feel what's underneath it in a lot of ways. And it sort of stops us from feeling, which I always find this fascinating. I don't know. And the creation story in the sort of Christian culture, it's the first thing they feel is shame when they're sort of kicked out. It's like this, when they're out of paradise, when they're lost, the first thing they feel is shame, which I think is really apt. And it's this idea that I need to hide and I need to not share myself. And I need to disconnect because what might happen if I'm seen in this way. And so that's why I think shame is more related to trauma, in my opinion, than the Enneagram number, trauma and addiction than our specific Enneagram numbers. I think 2s, 3s, and 4s can get a heavier dose because of this such a need for a sense of identity from other people, right? It's like the relationship and an identity. So that shame comes up more often because so much of their focus is on others and what they think of me and where my identity is. And so that kind of leads them to more of a sense of shame because they are focusing more. But I think if we're talking about inherent human emotions that we're born with from day one, that it's sadness, anger, and fear. And that's why I like defining it as sadness rather than shame.
Okay.
Does that make sense? That's kind of how I like to frame it.
And that does make sense. I suppose my quick rejoinder would be, in order to experience a past-oriented feeling, you need to have a past, which a baby in utero lacks. So shame being a past-oriented feeling requires you to have had some relational experiences. So that might just be my quick and dirty I would want to push into that a little bit because, and part of this is experiential, that so many of the 2s, 3s, and 4s, when talking about shame, it really hits. I don't know.
It does. It really does.
I don't know that I've heard sadness as much. And on the flip side, I don't know that I've heard, I don't know if you would like to speak to shame in your life. I know that TJ has spoken about that's just not a buzz. That's not an emotion that really hits.
For me, I feel it a lot.
Okay.
Especially, yeah. And it was connected to a lot of addictions I had in the past and stuff are very much fueled by shame. This what's wrong with me? I messed up. I can't, I think it's regardless of your Enneagram number, you can absolutely develop shame.
Right.
And it comes from more than just your Enneagram number, but that's fantastic. They don't feel shame a lot. I love that for you.
It's my 8 wing.
Yeah. But yeah, the sadness for them, I think is a little more, I think it feels more fair, which is a lot of my 9ness coming out, like fair to sort of say, rather than this. Yeah, because people, yeah. I think it definitely lends itself to the 2, 3, and 4 lens more than the other numbers. But I think it's this innate. It's innate because so kids don't even develop shame until, because when we're born, there's this belief that we don't see a separateness between us and the people around us, especially like our mother figure. Like we think we are that. There's no boundaries there. I am you and you are me. Our brain, and so that's why disconnection is so terrifying for kids. And so when that disconnection starts to happen, that's when shame can start to come in. Like this caused that disconnection. I need to not do that again.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and I think sadness is a little more universal. Like we all feel anger. 8s, 9s, and 1s have a focus on anger. We all experience fear. 5s, 6s, and 7s have a focus on fear. Yes. We don't all necessarily feel shame. Like I 8s and me are great example of like it's not as universal, but I think sadness is. On
the surface, at least, I think I've had some clients who are 8s who took so long to admit that they thought they were bad and they were ashamed, but they just can't even recognize it at first.
Sure.
I mean, just that denial is a really intense defense mechanism for the 8s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of my pitch on that, on why I like it to frame it as sadness versus shame, because I think shame's a whole different thing than those 3 emotions.
Yeah, I like it.
At the very least, it's there's all sorts of us that need to wrestle with our sadness, and so valuable. Let's do that. When you're talking 2s about their sadness, what comes to mind?
Yeah, 2s are definitely going to repress their sadness more than the other in a lot of ways, but it's also they know it's there, but they don't want it to be there. Versus the 3 who doesn't even know it's there a lot. And it's a lot of, I don't want to be sad because that's not a good look, or I'll be a burden on other people. I can't, if they are sad, then I can't do my thing that usually helping other people or building relationships or being there for other people. I can't do that if I'm sad. So I need to try not to be sad. But that's under the surface. It is there a lot more than 2s, I think, want to admit. It's sort of this, it's like halfway in their awareness, I think. But it shows up. Yeah, and it shows up. There's a lot of sadness around relationships is where it comes out in a lot of ways. Like I lost this person, or I'm sad for this person, or this person happened and it just really affected me and I'm really sad about it. Yeah, it's way less present than 3s and 4s, than 4s especially. But yeah, that's how it comes up. I remember one clients crying who are 2s and then apologizing afterwards. Just being shocked that they did that. And I'm sorry. Or I had a client who, my client started finding out about my wife, I had a client who's a 2 say, what right do I have to be sad in here when you're going through that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, what does that have anything to do with yours? It was shocking to hear that.
Sadness might be okay to experience, but because 2s are so focused on external relationships, they can't feel their sadness because that automatically puts that sadness onto the people around them.
Yes, it gets in the way of kind of what they're wanting. They think it does.
Right.
The thing I heard there is that 2s, 5s, and 8s are all going into relationships expecting rejection. And that's what I heard, is that there's already a shields up for the relational sadness that they might feel. And so the repressing of sadness is like they've already prepared for the emotion because, of course, they're entering the relationship expecting rejection.
Yep. Or they sort of were taught early on that there's no place for it. Your place is to help other people. So you can't be sad. I don't care what you think. You have to help dad do this, or you have to be responsible for this. It just doesn't even leave room for them to feel their own sadness, even if they wanted to, a lot of times.
I love the idea that threes move into the threes that experience sadness and say, this isn't a good look. I recall walking in, my wife was watching something that reminded her very deeply of her mom. My wife never cries in movies. I'm a movie crier, and she always is quite observational about wanting to see if I'm crying during, whatever
Which ruins
cartoon
it.
is on
Every
the
time
screen.
It ruins it. Takes you out of the moment. Ruins
It does.
But she's in there just watching this, just weeping. And I came in and she got so mad.
No way.
That I caught her crying. And the idea that this is not a good look is, I think, spot on.
Like, yeah. Wow. Any clients that I've had who's a 3, when they would cry, they would go straight into fight or flight mode. Like I had a client who cried. He would not look at me. And I saw his legs were tapping. I said, what do you want to do right now? He said, I want to run away. I want to get out of here and never come back. It's such this like, you're like, you cannot see this. This is not good. I don't have control of this. This is not how I want to present myself. It's so off from how they want to be. And if you see that, especially, it feels like everything's at risk for them. Mm-hmm. What I've also found is 3s connect a lot with music and animals. This sort of sadness, but disconnected and like a safe distance kind of. I think a lot of 3s I know can be very emotional around music and be really touched by movies and stories and music. And I don't know, I see that a lot with 3s, maybe not all 3s, but it's this empathy from a safer distance to where I can feel this way. I don't know. I see that a lot, and a lot of fear of their own sadness.
Much in the same way that like 9s are unaware of their anger, like they and
100%.
So like it comes out sideways for us. 3s. Because they're not fully engaged with their own emotional center. They're not fully engaged with what they're feeling on the inside, because they're spending so much energy putting on this mask and like doing this work to make sure that their presentation is a certain way. That like the act of experiencing sadness, especially if it's causing someone to have a physical reaction like crying, they don't have control over that. They're not presenting the right image, but also it's coming out of them sideways. They don't really know what's happening.
It's surprising, or I have a friend who's one of my best friends is a 3, and she'll every once in a while be like, guys, things have been so bad in my life for the last 2 weeks. I'm like, what? Me and my other friend that we talk like, what? Since when? Like, it's like surprising for everybody, even her sometimes, because it's so hidden.
Yeah.
Is something that we've been talking quite a bit about recently, is that for 2s, 3s, and 4s, many times in order to get their minds and hearts around the world around them, it needs to get into the past. 3s aren't going to experience the grief or the strong like internal feelings, their own feelings, until the event has passed for a little bit. But in the moment, they're on point.
They're on point. They will grieve before or after, but on the moment they are no emotion.
Very aware of what they're supposed to do right now, and only until the event gets into the past, then they can do something. So that makes a lot of sense. That I've had a hard time these last 2 weeks. It's because now it's in the past, and now you can actually do analysis.
Who was it? I think it was Beatrice Chestnut who said in some panel of hers online, somebody said, as a 3, sadness isn't very aerodynamic. So I don't like it. It's slow. It goes against, I want to move forward. I want to achieve, and to be sad slows that down. So I need to not. And then it just compounds on itself.
I think that may be true of all the, I may be speaking wrongly here, but for 3, 7s, and 8s, for all the aggressive types,
I can see
emotions, our emotions are baggage, or they're obstacles.
At least most of them. For the 7s, probably like half of them are good for them and half are bad.
Right, there it is.
Just got to split that cleanly, or attempt to at least.
4s never experience sadness, of course.
Nope.
I imagine this is a tricky place to go, because as in some ways, the 4's authentic emotions of sadness are going to be valuable. And on another side, you might need to name. I'm not sure this is helping you, pal.
Yeah, they can almost use this like melancholy, depression as like a defense. I don't know if you've ever heard it phrased this way before, but I love this idea that if a 4 is sad about losing something or sad about something, they're still connected to it. If they stop being sad, they're no longer connected to it anymore, and they truly lost it, and it's not a part of them. So it's this like connecting with something through sadness, which makes zero sense to every other number on the Enneagram. There's almost like a sweetness to the sadness that fours they almost like it. It can feel good, like an 8 with anger. Like it feels good. It's powerful. Like for a 4 to feel sad, it's like, this is meaningful and it's deep and it's rich. And I like it, which I felt before in brief bits. I mean, I feel like I've felt that lots of things as a 9, but I don't stay there ever.
Yeah. I haven't really thought about 4s and nostalgia on that front. The image that came to my mind, that you may have seen the Pixar film, or it's a Disney film, the Coco one, where they go to the land of the dead. And if
I have not actually seen that.
If people forget you, this was part of it. Like if people forget you, then you disappear in the afterlife. So this is why it's really important to keep pictures of your ancestors up, so that you can remember, here are the people who have come before you. That was the image that came to my mind.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably an image on so many different things from Pixar movies. Those can be on point.
Right.
So another thing with 4s I hear a lot from clients is like, I really need to grieve more on my dad. Or like, do you though? Like there's this, or I finally let myself grieve my dad. Like, I thought we've talked about that for weeks. Right. Like it's just like this continual need in their mind to feel sadness and to ramp up these emotions, because it's important. It feels like I'm not doing what I should be doing or supposed to be doing if I don't feel it. It feels inauthentic to not ramp it up, which is always interesting to see.
Yeah. Attraction to the depthier emotions. And clearly in my sphere, which I have cubicle life, I have in my car going home life, I have breakfast cereal life, but then I have this big depthy emotion of my parent who died. And clearly that's what's going to get my attention. Yeah.
Yeah. And need to get more and more attention.
Yeah.
Like I can't let it go, because that's not good.
Some real there.
Yeah.
You got thoughts on that, TJ?
Well, and it's also the idea of maintaining connection. Like my mom passed away a few months ago, and so I'm like processing this as we're talking about it, and it's like, oh no, am I a 4? I'm not, but the idea of experiencing, intentionally maintaining that sense of sadness, of grief, in order to maintain the connection to a lost loved one.
A huge piece.
Whereas if you resolve it, if you go through all the way through the grief and come out the other side of it, then now that person is truly lost to you.
Yes, it's scary to give up for them.
Sure.
Again, because it's much more than just the emotion. It's everything that comes with it and the connection. Right. And it's even 4s, even just as a whole, unconsciously are grieving this like time when I was complete as a kid. When I wasn't missing anything, when I had everything, and when I wasn't abandoned. And it's like there's this almost grief about that.
Yes.
That they have lost, and it just permeates everying, even out of like specific contexts of loss. I think it's fascinating how 4s work that way.
That's lovely. I was thinking, can a 4 envy their former self in that way?
Probably. That's interesting.
Is there a quick word, just in case, is there a quick word for 2s, 3s, and 4s on wrestling through shame that they may experience, just on the fact that 2s, 3s, and 4s all have a desire for attention, relational connection? We're not going to go into shame individually, but any word on things that come to your mind in terms of therapy there?
I don't know, because it can be so different, 2s, 3s, and 4s, right, with how they approach that. But I think such a huge thing that all of them experience is this: what's wrong with me that I feel blank? What's wrong with me that I do this? There's like, what's wrong with me? Like nothing.
Right. There's your unhealthy should, right?
Yeah. There's all that exists with every 2, 3. Like, what's wrong with me that I'm doing this? Why am I like this? And it's usually other people focused.
Right.
It's like, I'm being told, or I think I should feel this way, or I'm not. And so what's wrong with me? It's like, who told you that? Like, you're allowed to feel what you feel. That's it's important. But and then it gets into the 4s, like, okay, cool, and they just take that and run with it. But so it's hard to do all of them. But I think that's what I would say. Like, nothing is wrong with, or sort of this is what you think you quote should feel. Where's that coming from? Right. Like, oh, are other people actually like? No, look at like there's so much wisdom in what we feel. But sort of ignoring that in favor of, it's so easy for 2s, 3s, and 4s to absorb other people's ideas of how they should be feeling. Such a huge like factor for 2s, 3s, and 4s around their emotions. And so to more ground themselves in what they are feeling in the moment, disconnected from everybody else's expectations, is very difficult, I think, but important.
Boom. That's good.
Okay.
Moving to the 5, 6s, and 7s, we move into the fear triad. 5, 6s, and 7s all think about the world in the future and filter the world through this future focus, and that causes an underlying feeling of fear because you can never predict the future, of course. You want to talk about 5s and wrestling with fear?
Yeah, I think 5s, the fear is around depletion so much more than the other numbers. Depleting of their resources, of their energy, of their social meter, their physical things.
Yeah. Well, in therapy, will you be able to? I imagine 5s are quite difficult to get some information out of at times.
Information?
So
No. Emotions? Yes.
There you go. We'll talk about that. Like,
yeah, they're so in their heads. So in their heads. Asking them to actually feel their emotions is like pulling teeth at first.
right.
It's like, hold on, stay with me. Stay with me. It's in our culture as a whole, asking somebody how they feel, a lot of times they will answer how they think. But 5s just are the archetype for that. It's like, hold on, didn't ask what you thought. Try again. And sometimes over and over. And it's hard. It's like, use a 1-word emotion word. It's just difficult for them to parse that out. It's so funny. And some of I'll sort of recognize their tells, and they're like they'll look up and back and forth, and they're just whoop, you're in your head. Nope, pause. What are you feeling right now? Feeling. It's difficult for them. But so much of that is the fear isn't as obvious for a lot of 5s, I think, because it's such an innate thing in them to kind of mitigate any loss of their energy or their resources. They won't even get themselves into situations where it risks it. So they don't feel this active fear a lot, I don't think, because they're so careful with what they're doing. I heard somebody say once, if I'm the 5, like if everybody's jumping into a pool, I'm going to be the last one. I'm going to watch everybody, make sure everything's okay, and they don't do anything dumb. And then I'll go. Or another guy in the same panel said, if I'm a pencil and I play my cards right, I'll never have to use my eraser. And so it's like with the 5, it's hard for them to connect with directly because there's so much preparing and learning and not even getting into situations where they may be unprepared or stretched to the limit that they don't feel that fear a lot. But so much of this is the preparatory stuff around if I learn this, and the fear of being incompetent is huge for 5s too.
Yeah.
Like I'm not good enough at this. I don't know enough about this. And there's a fear there for sure.
And they don't really recognize that the reason that they need to spend the time and energy and like gather the resources is because they are afraid of not having that in the future.
Yes.
And
it's so hard to see directly
because they're so far in front of it that
yes, that's a perfect way to say it. They're so far in front of it. Yes. That's a great.
Are you able to name the fear for 5s that you're speaking with when they talk about their behavior on that? And will they resonate with that kind of language, or is that something that I'm going to have to think about that for a minute?
Probably that one, but hopefully we'll get there eventually.
Right.
When you start pointing it out, that kind of preparatory piece, like what you're afraid of. Like if I say, okay, imagine you jumped into something without preparing, like, ooh, there it is. Now I feel it. Kind of this sort of hypothetical kind of changing up just even in their mind. Like, or what if you didn't know this or didn't, then it's like, ooh, I feel it. Yeah. I think the goal is hopefully that they do eventually see it, but pointing it out can be tricky.
I found that it's actually a lot easier to point at the fear of 5s in a group setting because like you only have the one that it's the one trick at that point. But like if you're asking the group a question, the 5 is immediately afraid that they're going to get it wrong or that they're not going to know what to say.
Oh wow!
And like if you can point that out, even if you give them time to get in front of their fear. So like we had a group yesterday where we went around the table and asked a specific question, and our 5, who was second to last, pointed out that like she was able to observe everyone else answering first and sort of prepare herself for what she had to say. And like if you can point out like what you felt at the beginning of that when you realized that you had to talk and you weren't prepared yet.
Before you prepared. That's a fantastic. Yeah, because with sort of withdrawn type, they're pulling in and observing and checking everything out. And if you can catch them before they get to figuring all that out, then the fear is totally there.
Yep.
That's a great point.
I want to move on, but I have to ask one more question on this. The feeling that is there for the 5 of fear that's motivating their behavior, but they're not saying that they're fearful. Are fives aware that they're fearful and not sharing it, or is it the case that I need to show you that this feeling actually is undergirding a lot of your behavior?
I think they're very much aware of it, and I have to show them because they're so good at fear response or prepare so I never have to feel fear. And so they're kind of disconnected in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But this, it's such an automatic thing to start preparing that you have to pause them before they're preparing to point out kind of what's between the thing and the preparing. Yeah. But once you can do that, it's way easier to see, especially than sixes. Sixes will deny it way more than fives, I think. In a lot of ways. Depends on how familiar they are with the Enneagram, actually, because it's so common to teach sixes about fear. They see it easier in a lot of ways. Right. But if a person is not versed in the Enneagram as a six, I found that it's actually more difficult to point out. They'll call it preparedness or practical or realism or whatever.
Oh, that's a good word.
Nobody uses the word realism more than sixes.
Yeah, if somebody says, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist, that means they're a pessimist.
Well, to transition to the sixes, I imagine you will hear the fear coming out in therapy with a lot of sixes. How do you navigate that with sixes?
Yeah, it's so interesting, especially because sixes, there's such a spectrum between that phobic, counterphobic kind of idea of what we do with the fear, right? And they can look so different. It's interesting, but it's all fear. Always fear, no matter how much bravado is there, how much walking into dangerous things or intention, there's fear there. And that is really hard to point out, especially because it doesn't look like fear. Mm-hmm. There's fear of themselves, fear of things around them, fear of people, the paranoia. I'm convinced that most conspiracy theorists would be more sixes than anything else, because it's a fear of the unknown. And I need to figure out, it feels like logic to think about something that's in the dark that I can't see, but it's not. It's pure conjecture. Mm-hmm. Conjecture. Yeah, but a lot of sixes are like, I'm not afraid. I like to be prepared. I like to be ready. I'm practical. I'm prepared. Yeah, that language comes out a lot. I love the example of, I had a client say this once. He's this very counterphobic six, pushes himself so hard in so many intense situations. And he gave this example, and then I added the other one for the more of a phobic six. If the six is in a boat, and they're a small boat, they're worried it's going to sink. A counterphobic six is going to start looking around for a bigger boat, somebody to help them fix it. It's another boat to go into, not theirs. A counterphobic six, well, I'm going to jump in the water and swim for as long as I can so I can prove that I don't need this boat. But there's a fear of not being able to swim and take care of myself.
Sure. So
this client has always said, if he's afraid of something, he has to do it. Which is still, he realized one day it clicked, and he brought it to me with his brother. He was blown away. He's like, I'm afraid of being afraid of something, which is still fear.
Yeah.
He's like,
and fear is still ruling your life.
Yes, absolutely. It's still ruling every decision that you make in that, whether you're hiding and needing other support or trying to do it yourself or whatever. It's fear so that I'm not. Yeah. And so it can look so different for sixes. It can absolutely paralyze them, or it can make them run into something really difficult and scary and potentially dangerous, but it's still fear. I had a client who was one of the most intense clients I've ever had, very racist, got kicked out of a hate group. That's real. Wow. Because of how racist and threatening and all it was intense. And he said, he admitted one day that it was fear. It was unreal to see him admit that. But he said, if I don't pick a side, I'm going to get run over. And that always stuck with me. Like this, I have to, even if I don't, he didn't say this part, but even if I don't believe fully the stance I'm taking, it's better than being in the middle somewhere. So I have to sort of pull everything in this direction and be suspicious and project everything and scapegoat certain people because they're the problem. And it can get really intense looking, the fear, and scary. It can look violent and angry and dangerous coming from fear. Fear can be so destructive.
And I think like this is the last of those anchor points. The sixes have such a disconnect with how they process their fears. Like fives work so hard to get in front of it, and sevens were working to get away from it, which we'll talk about in a minute. But sixes, they don't, their processing of it is broken in the way that threes.
That's a great way to put
processing that. Sadness is broken.
Yeah. It's convoluted.
And so it comes out in this, it's either overdone or they rush into it.
Yeah. Yes. There's the convoluted piece, the whole, get political kind of, and you can cut this out if you want, but like the people saying with the whole pandemic hit, it's like, you're all living in fear of this virus. It's like, you are in fear that the government is trying to control you with masks and take away your rights. Right. That's still fear.
Right.
Like you are not away from fear. Like that's just classic 6. Like you are all afraid and you shouldn't be. Don't you realize the government is kind of control us? And this is a whole conspiracy starting. It's like, whoa, how is that not fear?
Right.
It's but it's so hidden from them. They don't see it. They see it as, I'm being practical and I see the truth.
Right.
And it's just, they're so led by intense presentations and somebody who talks like they know what they're thinking. A 6 will, okay, cool, then I'll trust you. And it's not logic. And it's a scary place to be in the head of 6.
That, as a thinking repressed person myself, I can speak with some authority on this, that my thinking repression comes in a different place in terms of the present moment, in terms of what I ought to be doing and not even understanding my own behavior. But the value, for the thing that I need most is wisdom about my place in the world and really focusing on what is wise. And that's the same for 6s. It's a different kind of, they're dealing with fear, not anger. I deal with anger. What is wise in terms of how the world is coming at you, and all the hypotheticals are out there bombarding you all the time, and the only shield you got is wisdom. And if you can't get there, conspiracy theories feel like they're going to protect you. And it's an idol that is worthless. And we know it's worthless because I can show you, 3 millennia of conspiracy theories and the ridiculous things people have believed over the countless years, and how many of them prove to be false. Obviously 6s, here's another problem, that 6s need to shore up their anchor in the past. They don't have an anchor in the past, and so that can be a very difficult thing. But that's part of wisdom, it seems to me. If it's the case that you're a 6 and you wrestle with that sort of thinking, or specifically with conspiracy theories, here's the road forward.
And if you are able to address your fear and soothe that in a different way, because the conspiracy, it's an attempt to soothe your fear, right? Like I want to be prepared and ready and know what I don't know. But if you're able to, in therapy, address your fear directly, learn how to tolerate it, then you don't need all these other sort of defense mechanisms to handle it anymore, because you're able to meet it directly.
Yeah, that's a great word.
Well, and much like 3s needing to learn how to trust and engage in their own emotions, 6s need to learn to trust their own judgment. They need to learn that like their fears are not necessarily unreasonable, but they are capable of navigating what those fears are, and completely relying on someone else's authority is not getting rid of your fear. It's just shutting it. It's just trying to put a Band-Aid over it with someone else's judgment. It's
which happens in therapy.
Relying on an institution, relying on a conspiracy theory. They're the same.
Or a therapist.
They're not trusting your own judgment.
Yes, which is interesting. 6s like almost like they will want to make me their authority figure to tell them the right way to do things.
Right.
And I will refuse as best I can, because that's what they need. They don't need me to just be another version of their ego defense of finding and so 6s, I'll say, like, usually when I start with them, they'll say, what is this going to look like? What do we need to do? What do I need to prepare for? How is this therapy going to look? And I'm going to say, we'll talk about that. But right now, not knowing, what is that like for you? What I'm not telling you. It is awesome and intense. Because it kind of steps behind the curtain of their, when we don't have our ego defenses that we normally do, we're faced with what's underneath that we normally don't even see in the first place because they're so automatic.
Right.
Spot on. Yeah, the last of the fear triad are the 7s. I imagine therapy with a 7 is good times, and then there might be a crash occasionally.
I feel like therapy with a 7 is only ever the hard side.
Oh, really?
The hard side.
Like do you ever have 7s who aren't going through something serious?
I don't think anybody. I think everybody's going through something serious.
Sure.
If we look at it like that, I mean, sorry to like totally non-answer that question. 7s are so interesting. The only people I've ever had flake and never come back and never respond. Only people sevens, several of them.
It's healthy for my heart right now.
And what do you mean?
I'm getting ghosted and I'm mad about it.
When I shifted a few months ago, this software I use to schedule clients, I shifted to where my clients have all the control of canceling and rescheduling things because I was taking so much time. Guess what happened to all the sevens?
They all did.
They start canceling. They just start canceling. And then it was unreal to see like how much effort, which shows me how much effort it takes for a 7 to show up to a place where we're talking about hard emotions. So difficult for them. It is like a threat. Like it's unreal. And so to see them, and so it's either there's a lot of rabbit trails because there's almost like a fear of talking about the hard things. And so it's like on rabbit trails and it's fun. And I'm like swept up in it sometimes. Like, oh, wait, like what? How are we talking about? What are we talking about? Like you just brought me along to these awesome, exciting stories and I loved it. And I just kind of got swept up by it. And so to kind of, I had a client once and there's sort of any of their emotions. So there's such a fear of feeling anything. I had a client once who she lost her mom. Her mom died very close to in front of her, found her when she was like young teenager, went back to school 3 days later. Never processed it again until she started seeing me over 10 years later. It was like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. It's such an unbelievable ability to just shut it off. And we were talking once and I saw her eyes glisten and she paused and then kept talking. And I said, well, hold on. What did you just feel? And she said, nothing. I didn't feel anything. What are you talking about? I was like, can you go back just a second? And then she realized, I just felt sadness. It was so automatic. The fear of feeling it that just go onto it. And that's what the sevens fear looks like. It's just a next thing, fast paced. What can we do to have fun? What could and it's so fear based. It's fear of what could happen if I stop, if I don't do this, if I don't. Yeah. Does that make sense? That's how I see it a lot. I've had sevens who are really aware, say like, I know I want to make a joke right now, but I need to sit with this. I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Yeah, and it's so like just seeing them feel it. I just seriously light up.
Oh, that's so good.
And as that client with her mom, after over a year of work, she said, I think I'm ready to process this. I was like, oh, I started crying because I was like, wow, that just knowing how huge of a thing. And then we didn't for a few more weeks. And then we did. I always tell when I teach this to like therapists, like it needs to be a slow circle into the trauma for sevens, especially because the quicker you go in, the more harshly they'll like throw up that sevenness, deflecting and joking and all that stuff.
It's said by me frequently, and it's only because there's popular examples that sevens often are the type that I see most frequently taking their own lives. I don't know if in terms of, I suppose it's just in popular culture that is my only reference point. But people that would normally type as a 7 just from a distance and I'm just guessing obviously, but I'm like, oh, unable to get to that spot where they're able to do the hard work. And you hit that spot where what do I do with this? And this is the escape, you know?
Yeah, sure. Especially when like this heavy depression isn't just sadness. It's like sadness unfelt, built up over time. All these emotions that we need to feel that we don't. Right. And just sevens are so good at not feeling it that I can just really hit. And they're so good. Like it's almost the more they double down on ignoring it, the worse it gets. And it's just like something's got to give in a huge way with sevens.
Right.
Which sucks.
There's the answer. I mean, that's why that would, in theory, that would be why.
I think, that would make sense to me. Yeah. And I know that's just anecdotal, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And that's why people can be so shocked by it too. Like, what? Yes. Like they seem so happy and fun. And like, yeah, of course they did.
Yeah. You see memes of that sort all the time where it's like, this is what depression looks like. And it's all these very bubbly superstars that you know. And you're like, well, there it is.
Yeah. Which is wild.
Bring
our culture just furthers that too. Doesn't give us the tools and the time and the permission to feel anything. And so it builds up in everybody.
Well, and like coming back to the idea of fear, like the way that I see fear show up in sevens so often has been reframed already. So that they're not even really aware of the things that they're afraid of because they've changed the way that they think about that fear so that it's not actually a fear, quote unquote.
Yes, it's a growth point or it's a learning. Yeah, the mind games they can do with themselves are amazing. I had a client who's a 7. She said when she was a little kid in like elementary school, she had to walk from one building to the other like once a week to deliver this thing. And she saw this ugly bush every week. And she in her mind said, I want to make that bush beautiful. I want to think it's beautiful, and forced herself to see the bush as beautiful. And it worked.
Yeah.
Sure. It's like this kind of mental exercise she would do as a kid for fun. And that's so 7.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reframe that sucker. It brings us to the anger triad. 8s are going to be wrestling with anger, and that's an outward anger, I imagine. What does it look like to work with 8s about their anger?
It is intense. There's one client I had who's an 8. I have to put her at the end of the day because there was so much energy that I absorbed from her. I would have to like scream it out or sing it out or something in the car on the way home because I just like a sponge. She would come in hot. And 8s can call it passion a lot or intensity, but it's just so many things filter through anger, and it can feel good for them. It can feel powerful, and they like it. And it's a way to connect sometimes with people. It's really interesting. And they can be angry about a lot of, but however, if it's a woman, it can be different because it can be more shame around it in our culture, attempted to hide it more, or a bursting out of it more, or because they're not quote supposed to be angry, and so they hold way more shame about it. But yeah, it's just there, and it's this. I'm not going to be controlled. You can't tell me what to do, which leads to being controlled.
Right.
I had a client say he lost his job. He called his dad about it. His dad said, "Okay, you need to go home. You need to start on your resume." And he said, "What I wanted to do in that moment was to go home and delete my resume." I was like, do you realize that he's controlling you right now? Like that is not your want. That is a reaction.
Yeah.
Which is so, and 8s hold a lot more trauma around places that they were powerless compared to other numbers where they couldn't protect themselves, which is really interesting. That anger couldn't protect them, couldn't save them, couldn't let them do what they needed to do because it's such a tool that they use in a lot of ways without realizing it. Yeah, that can be really intense.
Do you find, so we've talked about this in the past, but as a 9 working with an 8, I imagine that I hadn't heard this from you yet, but it felt like that part of your vocation may also be kind of difficult because you're trying to create calm for that client. Is it? I don't know if there's anything we're saying there. We can get back to 8s here in a second, but I found that interesting.
I think it's so, but sometimes to create calm and safety for an 8, it helps to be combative, to make fun of them. I remember the client who's an 8 once. I made fun of her. She was like, sorry, I haven't been in for a while. Like her pattern was, I can't come into therapy. I have my family to take care of. I have too many people to take care of. And we had talked about that. Like, you need to, it's helpful, but it's hard to say no to all these other things. She said, sorry, it took me so long. I was like, wow, what a surprise that you gave all of your time to other people. And she just like, and looked at me like that and just like wanted to like high five me. And like that created safety. And I was like, and I joked, I was like, is that too far? Did I do it? I said, I think I'm speaking 8 language right now, but did I go too far? She's like, no, that was so good. It's like, what is wrong with you? Why do you like that? But that creates a sense of safety, I think. But then shifting it to 8s want you to say, tell me what I'm going wrong. Tell me what I need to push into. Give it to me straight. And I'm like, actually, what I'm going to do with you now is be gentle and compassionate, accepting, and they hate it. To sort of, because be that way with themselves is so hard. And it can be very off-putting for them. Or it's interesting. Sometimes I've joined them. I'm like, I'll join you in this like intensity. And I'll kind of use it wisely at times. Sometimes I'll join it. Sometimes I won't. But I think if I can't make that decision unless I'm regulated, centered in myself, but kind of joining them in that intensity and kind of creating that safety, but also switching to, you don't need to be beat up more right now. You do that to yourself all the time. You need to know that you are innocent and good and stuff like that.
Is there wisdom in terms of the good sorts of anger, the bad sorts of anger when working with an 8?
I don't know. I feel like it's going to vary wildly. I don't know an answer to that. I don't think it becomes, I don't know, anger with, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question.
I would also think that, especially being a 9 in this type of scenario, that there's a fair amount of needing to like be the one in control of the space. Like that's one of the things that I encounter with my 8 friends is like, who's in charge here? And if it's my space, I'm the one in charge, and I can actually offer a lot more freedom to them because I don't feel like they're trying to encroach on me. You know, I would guess like as a therapist, especially as a 9, but in general, like working with 8s, there's probably something to like who's in charge in that room. And if the 8's the one that's in charge, you might as well go home.
Sure. Even as I had somebody who took my course who's an 8 say, if she's not the biggest in the room, she doesn't feel safe.
Sure.
Like not physically big, of course, but like
right.
powerful and right. And so if an 8 client does not trust me to be big and like protect them and like be in charge of that space, then their brain won't even let them go to process trauma.
Right.
Because it just won't even allow it because there's not a sense of safety for it. But yeah, that's 8's. And my twin brother's an 8. And so I love 8s. Such an interesting relationship with them. My identical twin brother, he's an 8 and I'm a 9, which is fascinating.
So many questions about twin brothers growing up, an 8 and a 9.
Yep. When we learned about the Enneagram, there's such a like we're so similar in so many ways, but also so incredibly different. And learning the Enneagram was like, oh,
there it is.
That's why gut center. There's the similarities, but we do in exact opposite ways in so many things. It's fascinating. It's awesome.
Around the circle buries the lead of the 8-9 twins. Man, that's a 2-hour podcast right there.
Right.
Well, the 9s come in, and you can see all the other types. Well, I imagine that you're going to have a special resonance with the 9s, but also perhaps difficult. What do you say to 9s about their anger?
9s are either my favorite or my least, or either my most favorite or my most difficult clients. Because like I know exactly what you're doing, and I don't know how to fix it either. So I don't know what to do. Right. But the anger, it's so hidden, or it's so unbelievably passive aggressive, and it's like, do you really not? Like I had a client who told me about his wife and her having an argument, and he went in the bedroom and turned the light off, and his wife was angry. So my client's a 9, and she went in and turned the light on to like keep him going to sleep because they were very petty. And he sat there and laughed at her. He laughed. I was like, were you angry? He's like, no, it was funny. It's like, no, it wasn't funny.
You were being a jerk on purpose.
Yes. And just so hard to point out. I've told, I don't know, I tell clients 9s a lot, especially like, if you're ever angry with me, I want you to share it. I want you to be able to practice expressing that in here. And when they do it, I hate it. It freaks me out, right. But it's so good at the same time. Yeah, I've had a client share with me that was such a huge moment for her. Like, you really upset me last week. And with my therapist, I actually shared that at one point in time. I was like, you were really irritating me last week. And I told her why, and I wept through the whole thing because it's so hard to admit that. And it feels so awful. And my attention goes on them and how they're reacting to it and how it affects them. And it's so hidden. I'm fine. A lot of times it's fine. Everything's fine usually means that a 9 a lot of times is angry. or it's so easy for them to be angry for other people. I'll say, okay, this person, your boyfriend treated you this way. You're not angry about it. Okay. Let's say your daughter was your age. She got treated that way. Like, oh, I'd be so pissed off. Like, to sort of separate it from themselves to somebody they care about. So much easier for 9s to see their anger.
Yeah.
Have never put my finger on that until this last week. What you just said, TJ had an experience when we were sitting around a table. TJ got furious at somebody else who wasn't in the room and what they did to somebody who was in the room. And that's creating calm for the sake of the room. But all of a sudden there's the anger. The anger can just rise up and be unleashed on somebody who isn't there and isn't going to be affected. Yeah. It made me laugh. So anyway, that's helpful.
Yeah. I have 2 friends who I talk to sometimes about my anger, and when I've let it rip, it was so scary. But they're like, we like Michael worked up. I'm like, oh, you do? That's surprising. Like, it shocked me. I almost like didn't believe them at first. Like, why would you like that? One was an 8, so of course you did.
Of course. Yeah.
But yeah, 9s, it's hidden and it's hard to. That's one of the most. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of work. Because also when 9s get angry, they shut down more a lot of times. Like, I don't want to do this, and I'm angry about it, but I don't realize that, and so I keep, quote, forgetting. Or stalling, or I'm too tired to do it. That's such a sign, in my opinion, of 9s trying to move in a direction that they actually don't want to move in.
Yeah.
Sort of being obstinate without even realizing it.
Yeah.
And oftentimes 9s, when they're angry at other people, it's a lot of they're actually angry at themselves for not being able to set a boundary, which is very uncomfortable truth to realize for me. Like, I'm mad at you for taking my time. It's like, actually, I'd never said don't take my time.
Yeah.
So I'm really actually mad at myself for not having the guts to say something, and I'm beating myself up for it.
Speaking of types that beat themselves up, we can finish this out with the ones.
Do it with the king of
there's especially if you have a radar for saying the shoulds should be set to the side, and the self-focused anger can be unhealthy. What comes to your mind when dealing with ones and their anger, especially when it's pointed at themselves?
Yeah, I don't know if you. So many ones hold their anger and their tension in their neck, in their upper back. It's unbelievable. I'll say that. Like, how do you know I go to the chiropractor once a week? Like, so it's just all this, like this holding my breath and keeping it down, and it just ends up all right there physically. I think they're similar to the twos in that it's kind of half hidden. They know it's there, but they see it as, I don't know, the direct they don't want to see it, especially some ones, like it's bad to be angry. I shouldn't be angry, or it's a sin to be angry, depending on how they grew up. Ones can sort of take whatever religious or cultural lens they came up with and use that to deny their own anger. Yeah.
Or philosophical lens.
Yeah. Yes. Was that a jab at Jeff?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't see him react. I thought I missed it for a second. Okay.
I just don't care.
You didn't react. So I was like, I laughed. Maybe that wasn't a jab. Maybe I missed.
No, you're good. You read it right.
Stone cold face. That was awesome.
No, actually, what I was thinking is the idea. I can see the one who's like, in my tradition, I've been thoroughly taught not to be self-condemning to pieces of crap like myself. It's really terrible. That was what was going through my head, is like,
be nicer to yourself, you idiot. Like,
that's how it goes.
and it's, I think also ones tend to be very angry just at the way the world is. The way things are. It's not like it should be. Things are off. I heard Richard Rohr once say something like, can you forgive reality for the way that it is? And I remember thinking, like, no, even not, I can't. That's hard. And it's just like, things are unfair and it shouldn't be this way. And this kind of this disconnect that ones have from this kind of somewhere in them, this is how things should be, and they're not. And I'm angry about that. And it's so fascinating that what they usually do is they don't question the shoulds. They question, like, I should be able to do this, but I can't. So something must be wrong with me. It's like, whoa, hold on. What happens if you question the shoulds in the first place? Mm-hmm. That's such a different question of like, and ones expect so much of themselves. Like, they could do this in life. And then they have 3 kids and they're 20 years older. Why can't I do what I used to do? It's like, well, because you had 3 kids and you're 20 years older. You don't have the energy anymore. But they continue to judge and critique themselves for when they were like at their best, and they're angry at themselves for not being able to. I think it's going to vary a lot about ones, but it can be themselves or the way the world is or other people. This just, there's so much anger there and intensity. Yeah, no, it can come out in this rigidity, in this inflexibility, in this tension in their bodies, even in the way even they hold themselves.
Truth. 6s, 2s, and 1s, as you're talking, those are all the types where the problem I imagine that you're going to hear from those types is about the world out there. 2s with the relationships, and 6s with we talked quite a bit about their fears, but the 1s is likewise. Like, I obviously have done just fine the last 3 years as the world's gone down in flames, and I clearly have control over all of it. Toxicity. But if I'm coming to therapy, I imagine that's the first thing on my list is probably going to be all these things I can't control that are probably separated from my immediate circle. I might tell you about like the problems I'm having with business or, employees, or like here's what the government is doing with the things that I'm a part of. But I really get fired up about all these things I can't control that are out there.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like safe landing places for my anger. Like, otherwise it's going to get unleashed on people closer to me.
Interesting. Oh, wow. Okay. Like intentionally taking that lens to people outside your circle so you don't hurt the people close to you or something.
Yeah. Intentionally
or unintentionally. Yeah. That's a lot of ones want to know in therapy, kind of, how do I do things right? What's the best way to do things? It's like if I can just do it right, then everything will be better. Mm-hmm. I actually have a friend a therapist of mine is down the hall. She's Black, and she grew up with this belief as a 1 of like, if I just do the right thing and follow the rules or whatever, then nothing's going to happen to me. Then I'll be okay. And then she realized that she grew up like, that's not the case with my skin this dark. What do I do with that? And that was so difficult. Like, I can do all the right things, but these bad things can happen. Like, and that was just awful for her to realize this. Like, I don't have control over things like I thought I did.
No, to build on that, this has been a realization for a real hard place for me the last few years, is realizing I just can't be good enough for you, for a person X, Y, and Z. Just never gonna be able to be good enough for you, am I? But that's the filter I'm coming to the relationship with. That's where I'm grabbing my value and how I am in the world. And the filter itself needs to be thought through, processed, potentially discarded.
Yeah.
I imagine my focus on getting angry at politics, I see with other ones in terms of like, I'm going to go over here and my dad's he's a triathlete and he's 78. And like all that anger is going into the bike, is going into the swimming regiment, or people who struggle with an eating disorder. Imagine that. Like, I'm going to take the anger. I would unleash this on my wife, but I'm going to take it. I'm going to do 20 laps instead. Kind of.
Yeah. Especially if there's an anger, but also I can't be angry at people. So it's got to go somewhere.
Yes.
So yeah,
and
sure.
Uh-huh. I imagine nines would feel some of that, like knowing that they could get angry. So what do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I tend to see their side. If I can understand where they're coming from, then I don't have to be as angry.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you really just care about me, actually. That's why you punched me in the face. That makes sense.
Yeah. That's fine. I don't have to be angry. I'll just put this in a box on a shelf.
Yeah.
For
I
later.
believe you
It's
had
fine.
my best
I don't need
intentions.
it.
I thank you for caring about me.
By the way, you have an 8 brother. Is that what you were saying? Sorry.
Yes. Oh man, he beat me up a lot growing up. I had an 8 and a 3 brothers. So, and my dad a 7. So all assertive types, aggressive types.
Wow.
Which is an interesting dynamic, and just kind of a lot of my own nine-ness and withdrawnness. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, carve out your own space somewhere over there.
Over here. You guys do your thing. You guys are crazy.
Last word on all these types coming to therapy?
What are you looking for? Sorry. Was that a question?
Seriously, that was way too broad. I didn't want to end with so your brother beat you up. Huh?
That was very thoughtful of you. Thank you. I think maybe I could talk about its use in therapy, or I don't know.
I got a question for you. Like, for somebody like myself, I've wanted to do therapy, never gotten into therapy. Part of that's my own perfectionism about the person across the table. Part of it is like I have no clue how to find a doctor or a dentist or somebody who's going to do the work with me. And I really, the phone book? Is that how you find a spouse? Is that how you find somebody that you're going to share your most intimate stuff with, who's going to help you with the things you care about most? And so do you have wisdom on that side of things?
So you're saying as a 1, you are worried that you'll pick the wrong person and mess that up. That's what you're saying.
Partially.
That checks out.
It would, right? For me, it's more, this coming to a therapist the same way that I would come to a lover. It would be of that sort. Like I'm That's
unethical.
Yeah, right.
Lose my license for something like that.
I saw that movie. It's like, it seems like I don't know how I go about doing this, but that feels very relational. And of all things in our last podcast, we talked quite about this with my type, just not wanting. The atmosphere needs to be correct to have what I assume is a very intimate connection. Do you find that therapy's? I assume that therapy's intimate.
It's very vulnerable. Right? Very there's a huge connection. It's very relational.
Well, and I suppose it's the case that anyone who's coming to that is like, what's the wisdom for finding somebody who works for you?
Yeah, and like I think each type is gonna struggle for different reasons.
Yeah,
it's so much work for me to find a good therapist that I just
find a good therapist to look into it, to tell your family that you have to do it. Might as well just not.
Yeah, my 6 spouse
so hard.
is like what if she picks the wrong one? What if it goes badly? Like etc. So everyone's going to struggle with like how do you find
in their own way
a good therapist?
So first of all, vet your therapist. The first one you pick does not have to be, and statistically might probably not be your best match. It is okay. Speed date. Yeah. I tell my clients that I actually tell them I won't charge them for the first session if they don't like it and don't vibe and want to go somewhere else. Because I think it's important for them to not feel like they're wasting their money and trying that out.
Yeah.
It's so important I actually have a podcast called Same Time Next Week where I interview people about their therapy experience. And most people reference their Enneagram number too, actually, which is cool. And there's so much wisdom in that podcast, I think, about what safety feels like as a therapist, what kind of therapist you want, what's helpful. Practically speaking, psychologytoday.com has a find a therapist tool. You can put in your location, your insurance or lack of insurance or specialty, and it'll pick all the people closest to you who specialize in all those things, and call and ask questions, ask how they view change and if they experience working with stuff that you're working with. Yeah, don't be afraid to vet your therapists. I know it takes a lot of energy, especially for some people to like try again and to start over, but and just to know you're not responsible for your therapist's feelings. So, I mean, way easier said than done. But don't come back. Don't call them again if it didn't work. If you're too afraid to have that conversation, you don't have to do that.
Right.
So that's some of my wisdom, I think. I
think that's excellent. Yeah. I had not put together. Obviously, everybody's going to struggle finding a therapist for reasons.
That's a whole Instagram post or podcast episode itself. That's fantastic.
That's why you still haven't found somebody. That's good stuff. Michael, it's been a joy having you, my man. You have, we're going to link you want to pitch the course for therapists that you're doing again?
Yes, I do a 6-week course for therapists. I do every few months. Teach them from the ground up the structure of the Enneagram and what it looks like and how it works, and teach them how to use it with their clients, especially as more and more people are learning about the Enneagram. It's such an incredible shortcut to understanding your clients, empathizing, guiding the work, the direction that you're going, noticing the places that you might get stuck. It's so helpful. So it's a 6-week course, 1 hour a week, live Zoom calls, and it comes with a community of therapists for discussion, over 100 pages of a workbook that we give out in each module, 6 modules. I love it. I love it so much. And start working on adding like consultation times afterwards. We all get discuss our clients together and what might help. And just wanting to create a more collaborative community of therapists. It's one of my favorite things that I do. Check it out. If you have a therapist who you want to know the Enneagram, send them that link and tell them to learn.
Nice. That's a good call. Obviously got a podcast apparently. Same time next week.
Same time next week. With a question mark on it.
Great name for a podcast.
Isn't that I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of it. Yeah, 8 episodes, first season is out. I love it. It was fantastic conversations, and everybody's growth looks different. It's so cool to see. And people have learned a lot about therapy. Sort of the tagline is demystifying the therapy experience, kind of taking a peek behind the curtain and what it looks like and how it works. And it's I'm so glad that I did it. I'm going to be doing a second season soon once I get funding, because I can't do it out of my own pocket again, but I definitely love doing it. You should check it out.
Of course, much love to Angie, to her health and to your all's future.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been just a joy having you. So,
yeah, it's been a blast.
Yeah.
That's what I got. You got anything else, Teach?
I got nothing, man.
This is DJ Wilson. He's officially awesome. I'm Jeff Cook. Who you aren't isn't interesting. Be who you are. And apparently you can go to Psychology Today to find a therapist.
Yes. Psychologytoday.com.